The kitchen smelled the same as it always had. Lemon soap, old wood. Something underneath both of those things that had no name, the specific accumulated scent of a house that has been lived in fully by people who understood what living meant. I set my duffel bag down by the door. Still carried the faint smell of the base, still carrying a body that hadn't quite remembered how to be home yet. My father was standing in the middle of the kitchen. He didn't raise his voice. That was always the thing about him. The control was the weapon, not the noise. "You have 2 days," he said, each word placed deliberately like furniture. "Pack what's yours, leave the keys, don't make this ugly." My mother stood slightly behind him, her face arranged into the expression she used when she wanted to appear reasonable while doing something that wasn't. My sister Claire leaned against the counter. She was wearing a new white sweater, her hair done. The posture of someone who has already moved into a room in her mind and is simply waiting for the physical reality to catch up. I stood in the entryway of the house my grandfather built with his own hands. And I listened to something breaking that no one else in the room could hear. My name is Alina Marsh. And the 2 days they gave me were not mine. They were theirs. They just didn't know that yet. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not this kitchen. Further, to the version of this family that existed before the calculations started. My grandfather was Thomas Marsh. He had built this house in 1971 with 3 other men and a design he had drawn himself on graph paper. It sat on 3 acres outside Savannah, Georgia, the back of it looking out over a creek that ran shallow and clear in summer and ran full and brown after winter rain. He was not a complicated man. He was precise, patient, the kind of person who said things once, meant them permanently, and had no particular interest in repeating himself to people who had chosen not to hear. My grandmother had died when I was 22. After that, the house had required tending. Not dramatically, incrementally. The way anything requires tending when one of the 2 people holding it together is no longer there. I was stationed 4 hours away. My parents were 40 minutes away. My sister was in the city. I came every 3 weeks. My parents came at Christmas and sometimes Easter. My sister came when there was something to post. I want to be precise about this because precision matters. I am not describing this to build a case for myself. I am describing it because it is what happened, and what happened is what everything else rests on. The calls started in my 2nd year of active duty. The pharmacy. The neighbor across the creek. The home nurse my grandfather had hired without telling any of us because he didn't want to be a problem. She couldn't find her medication this morning. He was out in the yard at 2 a.m., said he was checking the fence. Your grandfather is managing, but he can't manage everything. I remember the first call I took standing in a briefing room, half listening to a logistics update on a screen, feeling the distance between where I was and where I needed to be as a physical sensation, a weight behind the sternum. "I'll handle it," I said. And I did. I used leave time for doctor appointments. I learned to read lab results. I learned which medications couldn't be taken together, and which needed food, and which needed water, and which the pharmacist would refill early if I explained the situation carefully. My parents had reasons for being unavailable. They always had reasons. Client dinners, fundraisers, a conference that couldn't be moved. My father's particular specialty was treating other people's inconvenience as if it were a moral failing, and his own unavailability as if it were an act of God. "We can't drop everything every time something happens," he said once, when I called to tell him my grandmother had gotten lost for an hour before a neighbor found her 3 streets over and brought her home. "You're overreacting. We'll deal with it when it becomes serious." I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know how to explain something he had already decided not to understand. It was already serious. Claire's version of showing up was to visit twice in 6 months, take photographs in the garden, post them with a caption about cherishing family, and leave before dinner because she had reservations in the city. I was at the sink when she left that day. I watched her through the window, laughing into her phone, her voice bright. "This place just feels old," she said. "I don't know how they stand it." My grandmother was asleep in the next room. My grandfather was in the hallway. He heard every word. He didn't say anything, but I saw what happened to his face. That look stayed with me longer than anything she said. 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral, I was helping my grandfather to bed when he reached out and caught my wrist. His grip was firmer than I expected. "They think I don't see it," he said. I knew immediately who he meant. "They're not waiting for me to get better," he said. "They're waiting for me to be done." I didn't argue, because I had seen it too. The way my mother had started asking careful questions about the property. The way my father had begun walking through rooms with the eyes of someone measuring them for something. The way Claire had started forwarding me photographs of kitchen renovations, as if the future she was imagining had already been guaranteed. "I'm not going anywhere tonight," I said. He studied my face, then nodded. "I know," he said. "That's the point." A week after that conversation, my grandfather asked me to drive him to town. He was casual about it. Just some paperwork he'd been putting off. We parked in front of a small brick building near the marina. Brass plaque by the door. Daniel Mercer, estate attorney. Inside, the office smelled of paper and old coffee. The kind of room where conversations weren't rushed because they weren't meant to be. "I'll wait out here," I said. "No," my grandfather said. "You're coming in." That was the moment I understood this wasn't routine. Daniel Mercer was in his late 60s. The posture of someone who had spent decades listening rather than speaking. He stood when we entered, shook my grandfather's hand, then looked at me with the brief assessing attention of someone cataloging information. "So this is Alina," he said. "Yes," my grandfather said. "This is the one I told you about." Not proud, not sentimental. Certain. We sat. The conversation that followed moved slowly, deliberately. Mercer walked through documents, timelines, options. He asked precise questions and wrote the answers in a neat, deliberate hand. Years earlier, my grandparents had drafted a will. A simple, standard. The house and estate passing to my father, under the assumption that family would behave like family. That people would show up when showing up was required. That assumption had changed. "Circumstances evolve," Mercer said, sliding a document across the desk. "And sometimes so does the need for protection." I looked at my grandfather. "I'm not doing this to reward you," he said, directly, clearly. "I want that understood." "I know," I said. "I'm doing it because I need someone who understands what this place is," he continued. Not what it's worth, what it is. Mercer tapped the document. An irrevocable trust. Once established, not easily challenged. The property placed under a structure requiring oversight, documentation, and clear designated authority. And that authority would be, I started. You, Mercer said. The word sat in the room for a moment. Heavier than it should have been. Sole trustee, he continued. You control maintenance, sale conditions, access. Anyone who wants to make decisions about this property has to go through you, legally. I looked at my grandfather. They're going to fight this, I said. They might, Mercer said, but the structure makes that difficult, and the documentation we're preparing, he paused, will make their arguments weaker than they think. My grandfather didn't look at Mercer when he spoke again. They've already decided what this house means to them, he said. I'm just making sure they don't get to decide what it becomes. I signed where Mercer told me to sign. The notary stamped each page. The sound of it, sharp, precise, final, echoed in the small room like a lock turning. We drove home in the kind of quiet that has texture. They'll hate you for this, I said. They'll hate the boundary, he corrected, not the truth. I let that settle. My grandfather passed 8 months later. On a Tuesday morning. Quietly, the way he had done most things. I was with him. My father arrived 2 hours after. My mother brought flowers. Claire posted a photograph from the garden. The shift began the same day. My father started walking through rooms again, the measuring walk, the assessing walk. My mother asked careful questions about paperwork. Claire sent me a message about renovation ideas, a kitchen layout she loved, asking if I thought the original flooring could be refinished or whether it needed replacing. I didn't correct any of them. I let them move forward under the assumption that the story had already been written. That assumption gave me something worth more than any confrontation. Time. The safe in the upstairs study had always fascinated them. Not because they knew what was in it. Because they assumed it had to be important. So I made sure it was. Inside, I placed everything they would need to understand exactly what had happened and exactly what they had lost. A notarized copy of the trust. A letter from Mercer confirming its validity. A sealed envelope in my grandfather's handwriting. A USB drive. And on top of everything, placed where it would be the first thing seen when the door opened, a single sheet of paper. I chose the words carefully. Simple, direct, impossible to misread. If you are reading this because you came looking for something to take, you already know why you were left out. I closed the safe. I locked it. And waited. When my father stood in the kitchen and told me I had 2 days, I said okay. Not because I had nowhere to go. Because the deadline wasn't mine. It was theirs. Friday came gray and cold. I had packed enough to make it convincing. Boxes by the door, labels in black marker, a few empty spaces on the shelves where things used to sit. Anyone walking through would see exactly what they expected to see. A woman preparing to leave. What they wouldn't see was everything I hadn't touched. What they wouldn't know was that I had already decided I wasn't going anywhere. They arrived just before 5. My father first, keys in hand, the posture of a man arriving to resolve something efficiently. My mother a step behind, her expression arranged into concern. Claire last, her heels on the floorboards, her eyes moving quickly across the room, already imagining it differently. "Is that all?" she asked, looking at the boxes. A faint edge of disappointment. Like she had expected more. "It's enough," I said. My father looked around once. "Good," he said. "Let's not drag this out." He set his keys on the table. "The safe, we should go through it before you leave, make sure everything is accounted for." There it was. Not a question. A step in a process he had already decided belonged to him. "It's in the study," I said. "Same place it's always been." I followed at a distance. Not close enough to look invested. Not far enough to miss anything. My father found the key in the desk drawer where it had always been kept. He held it up briefly, the unconscious gesture of someone confirming possession, and moved to the wall panel. He pressed it open. The safe sat behind it, dull, unremarkable. He inserted the key. The click was quiet, almost insignificant. He opened the door. For a moment, nothing happened. He stared inside, posture unchanged, expression unreadable. Then he reached in and took out the top sheet of paper. I watched his eyes move across it. I watched the moment it registered. No sharp movement, no sharp breath. Just the specific, quiet stilling of a man encountering something he had not prepared for. A tightening at the jaw. A stillness that followed. My mother stepped closer. "What does it say?" He handed it to her without speaking. She read it, once fast, once slow. Then again, the way people reread things when they are hopping the words will rearrange themselves into something more acceptable. They didn't. Claire reached past her mother and grabbed it. "What does irrevocable even?" She stopped mid-sentence. For the first time since they had arrived, the room went completely silent. Not the silence of people choosing not to speak. The silence of people who don't know what to say. My father reached back into the safe. Pulled out the sealed envelope in my grandfather's handwriting. Opened it slightly rougher than he intended, the paper tearing along the edge. "Read it." It slowed. "Read it again." My mother's hand trembled slightly where she held the trust documents. "This can't be right," she said, her voice thinner now. "He wouldn't do this without telling us." "He did tell you," I said quietly. They all turned at once. Not because I had raised my voice. Because I hadn't needed to. Claire shook her head. "No, this is manipulation. You were here, you were the one handling everything. You could have." "Finish that thought," I said. She didn't. My father hadn't looked at me yet. He was still searching the documents, as if there might be a sentence buried somewhere that would undo what he had just learned. There wasn't. My mother found the USB drive. "What is this?" she asked. "Play it," I said. She hesitated. Then crossed the room to the laptop on the desk and inserted it. It clicked the file. The audio started with a soft crackle. Then my grandfather's voice filled the room. Older than I remembered from his healthiest years. But clear. Steady. Certain. "I am making this recording because I want there to be no confusion about my decisions. I am of sound mind. I understand exactly what I am doing." My mother closed her eyes. Claire took a step back. My father finally looked at me. Not with anger. Not yet. With something closer to disbelief. "I am not confused, My grandfather's voice continued. I am not being pressured. I am protecting what matters from people who only see it as something to take. The words settled into the room. Heavy, unhurried, final. I chose the one who showed up. No one spoke when the recording ended. My mother turned slowly. Her composure was gone. What remained was raw. Emily, she said, her voice breaking at the edges, what did you do? I followed instructions, I said. They left 10 minutes later. No speeches. No final arguments. My mother forgot her bag and had to come back for it. My father didn't look at me as he walked out. Claire did. If anger had a temperature, the room would have cracked. The door closed. The house went quiet. The first call came less than a minute after their car left the driveway. I watched my mother's name light up the screen. Let it ring. Let it go quiet. Let it start again. By the fourth call, I answered not to speak, just to listen. Her voice came through immediately. Breathless, stripped of the careful tone she had worn all day. Elena, don't do this, just wait, don't file anything else. We need to handle this as a family. I said nothing. A pause. The kind that happens when someone realizes they are no longer controlling the conversation. Elena, are you there? I ended the call. It rang again within seconds. Then again. For 30 minutes. Calls stacking one on top of the other. Messages in between. Call me back, we can fix this. You don't understand what you're doing. I saved every one of them. The legal filing came 3 days later. Structured and clean. The central claim, my grandfather had not been of sound mind when he signed the trust documents, that I had exerted undue influence as his primary caretaker. On paper, it looked measured. Concerned. In reality, it was desperation with better formatting. Mercer called me the morning after the filing. They've made their move, he said. I expected it. Good, then you know what comes next. We had been preparing for this longer than they realized. Medical records confirming my grandfather's cognitive clarity at the time of signing. The home nurse's documented statements. Financial records showing who had paid for what and when. Travel logs, pharmacy receipts. Mercer didn't argue emotion. He didn't need to. He had dates. He had documentation. He had the recording. And then he had one more thing. A message my sister had sent late at night and deleted seconds later, but not before I had seen it. If she doesn't cooperate, tell Dad to push the dependency angle. She'll fold if she thinks everyone finds out. Mercer confirmed the rest within days. My father's finances were not stable. Lines of credit had been called in. Personal guarantees were due. The house wasn't sentiment. The house was an exit strategy. Everything clicked into place. The 2-day deadline. The urgency. Claire's renovation plans. It had never been about family. It had been about survival, his dressed as concern for everyone else. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. Small courtroom. No dramatic lighting. No raised voices. Just wooden benches and a judge who had seen every version of this story and was interested only in which version was supported by evidence. My parents sat at one table. I sat at another. Claire between them in pale blue, her posture rigid. the posture of someone trying to hold things together through sheer physical stillness. Their attorney spoke first. He was good. He built a picture of a concerned family, a daughter who had overstepped, a situation that had been mismanaged by grief and proximity. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Mercer stood when it was his turn. He didn't argue their story. He replaced it. Dates, documents, records. He walked the court through the trust formation step by step, showed the signatures, the notarization, the timeline. Then he moved to care. Not what I felt. What I did. Pharmacy logs, maintenance invoices, travel records, the nurse's statement, the names of the medications I had learned, the appointments I had rearranged my leave to attend. He didn't say, I loved my grandparents more. He showed I had been there more. Then came the recording. My grandfather's voice filled the courtroom. The same voice that had filled the study. Clear, certain, final. I am not confused. No one objected. Because there was nothing to object to. Then Mercer addressed the motive. He was precise. My father's financial exposure. The timing of the 2-day ultimatum. The attempt to remove me from the property before any legal review could take place. My father was called to respond. He held himself together at first. Then Mercer asked a single question. Were you seeking control of the property in order to relieve financial pressure? A pause. Not long. Long enough. My father looked at the judge. Then at his attorney. Then briefly at me. We needed her to cooperate, he said, so we could stabilize things. That was all it took. The judge didn't react immediately. She didn't need to. When she ruled, her voice was steady and final. The trust was valid. The petition was denied. There was no evidence of undue influence. The documentation overwhelmingly supported the structure as intentional and appropriate. She went further. She addressed the 2-day ultimatum directly. She called it inappropriate and pressuring. She ordered my family to cover a portion of my legal fees. She established clear boundaries, no access to the property, no direct contact outside legal channels. Unless I chose otherwise. The room stayed quiet as she finished. My mother cried. Not softly. Not for effect. Claire didn't move. My father stood slower than he had sat down. His posture no longer carrying the certainty it had held when this began. They didn't look at me when they left. They didn't need to. 2 weeks later, my father quietly stepped back from a board position he had held for years. No announcement. No explanation. People understand more than they say. That afternoon, I drove back to the house. The same road. The same turn. The same view of the creek opening up through the trees as the driveway curved. Nothing about it looked different. That was the point. I unlocked the door. I stepped inside. The air was the same. Lemon soap, old wood, the thing underneath both that had no name. I set my bag down in the entryway. Walked to the kitchen. Reached for the ceramic mug I had used since I was a teenager. The one with the hairline crack along the handle that had never fully broken through. Filled it. Stepped out onto the back porch. Sat in the chair my grandfather had favored in the late afternoons. The creek ran clear in the autumn light. The trees held their color. Everything was exactly as it had always been. I sat there for a long time, not thinking about the courtroom, not thinking about the documents or the recordings or the legal fees, thinking about the small things. The early morning drives from the airport straight to the pharmacy. The pill organizers with the labeled days. The instructions taped to the cabinet doors in large, clear letters. The name of a home nurse who had called me in a briefing room to say that my grandfather was managing, but he couldn't manage everything. I hadn't won because I had fought harder. I hadn't won because I had been smarter. I had won because I had stayed. Because when it was inconvenient, when it cost me leave time and sleep and the distance between where I needed to be professionally and where I needed to be as a person, I hadn't left. And my grandfather had seen it. Not with sentiment, with the specific clarity of a man who had spent his whole life watching what people did when showing up was difficult. He had seen it, and he had made sure it counted. They gave her 2 days to leave the house. The house was already hers, and the safe they opened to find something to take contained everything they needed to understand why they had lost. Have you ever stayed when it would have been easier to go and had someone see it who mattered? Tell me below. And if you know someone who showed up quietly, consistently, without recognition, send this to them. They'll know exactly what it means.